Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really getting into the story of a Chicago street gang called the Almighty Saints.
That's right. We've pulled together quite a bit of material articles, reports, looking at their whole history, basically, from the start right up to, well, a pretty major recent event.
And our goal here really is to kind of sift through it all and get a clear picture, understand who they are, how they changed over time, and the impact they've had.
Exactly. And what's good is we have sources covering, like, the long view, their origins, how they developed, but also news reports zeroing in on a specific incident involving a member and an ATF agent.
So it gives us both that background and a snapshot of, well, what's happening now, or recently at least.
Yeah, should be a pretty full picture.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Origins. Our sources say the Almighty Saints kicked off in the early 1960s.
Yeah, and the location is specific, the back of the yards neighborhood.
And here's the thing that jumps out. Initially, they were formed by Polish youth around Davis Square Park.
Right. Which might, surprise some people today thinking about Chicago gangs.
Hmm.
It really shows how these groups often start super local,
Right.
reflecting whoever's in the neighborhood at that exact moment.
It's a little window into the makeup of back the yards back then.
Definitely. And how things change.
And the name itself, Saints. Apparently it comes from that old TV show, The Saint.
Get out. Really?
Yeah, and they even used a stickman symbol, similar to the one on the show. It's like this weird pop culture connection.
Huh. That's fascinating. A small detail, but it tells you something, doesn't it? About what influences were around, even for a group like this forming. It probably helped solidify who they were, too.
Yeah, gives them an identity marker right off the bat.
Mm-hmm.
Now, something else our sources flag as, well, pretty different, is their territory.
Oh, yeah, the back of the yard's turf.
Apparently, they've held on to that same basic area since the 1960s, which in Chicago gang terms sounds almost unheard of. Territories shift constantly, right?
They really do. So that stability, it's remarkable, like you said. It suggests they're, really dug in there, maybe generational, part of the landscape for a long, long time.
It implies a kind of staying power you don't always see.
Exactly. More than just lines on a map.
But, okay, the neighborhood didn't stay the same. Back of the yards changed. And so did the Saints.
Right. The sources show a big demographic shift. The gang became largely Hispanic American over time.
Which mirrors, how a lot of Chicago neighborhoods changed.
Absolutely. And then by the 1980s, there's another shift noted in the sources. Things seem to get more violent.
And drug trafficking becomes a major thing for them.
Yeah, that unfortunately tracks with broader trends in the 80s too, the rise of the crack epidemic, shifts in the economy. It fueled a lot of gang activity across the board.
It's interesting, though. You have these massive super gangs emerging in Chicago around then, right? Like the Latin Kings, the Gangster Disciples.
Yeah.
Huge organizations.
Yeah, these big umbrella groups often formed in the prison system initially. People Nation, Folk Nation.
But even with those giants around, a 1998 Chicago Tribune piece still called the Saints a persistent street corner gang. They weren't citywide rulers, but they were still there.
And that's a key point, I think. It's not always just about the biggest players. You have these localized groups that can still have a major impact, block by block. Their persistence shows they were resilient, adaptable, even without that massive scale.
They found their niche, sort of.
You could say that. They carved out their space and held on to it.
Okay, so speaking of those big alliances, the People Nation and Folk Nation, the Saints didn't jump right in when those formed in the 80s.
No, they stayed independent for a while, kind of renegades, as one source put it.
But that changed, didn't it?
It did. And the why is interesting. Sources suggest it happened maybe late 80s, early 90s. A lot of their members were locked up.
Ah, so joining the People Nation offered protection, alliances, inside prison.
That seems to be the logic, yeah. Safety in numbers, especially within the prison system where those affiliations are critical.
And it sounds like the Almighty Latin Kings kind of vouched for them, called them cousins.
Right. That cousin term often means like a shared background or maybe similar principles within the People Nation alliance. It suggests the Kings saw them as a natural fit, compatible,
Made the entry smoother, probably.
Likely.
And this alliance wasn't just on paper, right? There were visible signs.
Definitely. That's when Almighty gets added to their name, becoming the Almighty Saint.
Okay, tying them directly to the Kings and the broader People Nation.
And they adopted the 5-point star symbol, another clear marker of that People Nation allegiance. It signals who you're with, who your enemies are.
Changes how they operate, how others see them.
For sure.
Now, the sources also point to some really disturbing signs of their activity continuing over the years. There's that awful story from 1998
Oh, yeah, the 12-year-old kid.
who shot two rival gangster disciple members, basically as like an audition to join the Almighty Saints.
It's heartbreaking. Shows the terrible pull these gangs can have on kids looking for, I don't know, belonging, status, whatever it is. It led to that. Just awful.
Really highlights the environment, the pressures.
Absolutely. And it wasn't an isolated period of activity either.
No, fast forward to December 2004. There's this big police raid called Operation Broken Halo.
Right there, turf,
Yeah.
back of the yards.
And they arrested 25 members. Drugs, weapons charges. It shows they were still very much active, very much involved in crime.
Yeah, that's not small numbers. 25 arrests in one operation points to, a pretty significant ongoing criminal enterprise right there.
And then, just to hammer home the seriousness, 2006, a Saints member, Francisco Romero,
Convicted of murder, right?
No.
Long sentence.
45 years. And he escapes from Cook County Jail with 5 other inmates.
Wow. Yeah, that tells you something about the level of seriousness we're talking about with some individuals linked to the gang. It's not petty crime.
No, definitely not. Which kind of brings us closer to the present day and this really critical incident involving the ATF agent.
Right, the shooting of Agent Kevin Crump. This happened between 2017 and 2019 in terms of the whole event unfolding and the legal process.
And it really puts a spotlight back on the Saints and the dangers in that back of the yards area.
So the setup is 2017, you've got this joint task force ATF, Chicago PD, Illinois State Police working in back of the yards.
What were they looking into?
Illegal guns, primarily, investigating the flow of firearms, and intelligence suggested the Almighty Saints might be involved.
Okay, so they're actively investigating the gang's potential gun pipeline.
Exactly. Then, May 2018, during an undercover operation, things go terribly wrong.
This is when Agent Crump was shot.
Yeah. A guy named Ernie Godinez, identified as a Saints member acting as a lookout.
A lookout,
He
okay.
apparently saw the undercover agents, mistook them for rival gang members, and opened fire.
Oh, man. He thought they were enemies.
That's what the reports indicate. And Agent Crump was hit in the face, just devastating.
And that detail, mistaking them for rivals, it just speaks volumes about the tension, the paranoia, the constant threat level there.
It really does. It shows how volatile that environment is, how quickly things can escalate with deadly consequences, and the danger for law enforcement working undercover. Immense.
And this wasn't like a one-off incident for police in that area around that time, was it?
Not at all. That's a really crucial piece of context. Agent Crump was the 4th law enforcement officer shot in back of the yards in just the past year before that.
4th. Wow.
Yeah, there were incidents where 2 Chicago officers were hit by rifle fire, another shot in the leg. The area was experiencing a really bad spike in gang shootings, homicides. It was incredibly dangerous.
So the task force was operating in what was already a known hot zone for violence against police.
A very hot zone. Understanding that context is key to grasping the risks they were taking and the environment Godinez was operating in.
So a federal agent is shot. The response must have been huge.
Oh, absolutely massive.
Yeah.
Huge manhunt for Godinez. They put up a big reward, I think it was $61,000.
And did they catch him?
He eventually surrendered to federal agents. The pressure was immense.
Okay, so he's in custody. Then comes the court case.
Right. He's charged with assaulting a federal officer.
Mhm.
His defense, predictably, tried to poke holes.
How?
His lawyer argued the evidence was flimsy, even suggested, could it have been friendly fire? Did he even have a gun? Trying to create doubt.
Standard defense tactics, I guess. The prosecution?
They came back pretty strong, it seems. They had surveillance video showing Godinez's movements before and after the shooting.
Tracking him.
Yeah. Plus, text messages that they argued showed his intent, what he was thinking, and critically, ballistics.
Matching the bullets.
Matching the casings, found the gun linked to him, and placing the shots as coming from the gangway where he was positioned. They also had shot spotter data.
That gunshot detection system.
Right, which also pinpointed the shots coming from that same area.
Mm-hmm.
So multiple angles pointing to him.
Seems like a pretty solid case they built.
It appears so.
And Agent Crump, the injuries were severe, weren't they?
It's terrific. Permanent damage to his vision, lost tear ducts, nerve damage. Required multiple surgeries. They had to use steel mesh titanium implants. I mean, life-altering injuries.
God, just grounds it, doesn't it? This isn't just gang names and territories. It's real people suffering devastating harm.
Absolutely. A brutal reminder of the human cost of this kind of violence.
So what was the outcome for Godinez?
He was convicted in June 2019 and then sentenced in December 2019. 16 years and 8 months in federal prison.
Okay, so there was accountability in that specific terrible incident.
Yes, in that case. But like you said earlier, it shines a light on this much longer story.
Yeah, let's pull back again. The Almighty Saints. It's quite a story when you lay it all out.
It really is. You've got this group starting unexpectedly with Polish youth in the 60s.
Adapting as their neighborhood, back of the yards, changes demographically.
Becoming over time a more violent group involved in drug trafficking.
Holding on to their specific turf with unusual tenacity, even as these huge super gangs emerged.
Right, carving out that identity as a persistent local force before eventually aligning with the people nation, partly driven by prison politics.
Adding the Almighty. Adopting the star.
And then these incidents over the years, the 12-year-old, Operation Broken Halo, the jail escape, showing their continued presence and the seriousness of their activities.
Leading right up to the recent tragedy with Agent Crump, which just underscores the ongoing danger and volatility in areas where gangs like this are deeply rooted.
Exactly. It's a complex picture. They're not just a footnote. They're a long-standing part of Chicago's gang landscape with a unique trajectory and a clear, continuing impact. The Crump shooting is a stark, recent example of that.
It really makes you think, doesn't it, about what allows a group like this to last for, 60 years through all those changes?
Yeah, what are the factors? Social,
Yeah.
economic, the need for identity protection, however misguided.
It's complicated. And it raises those big questions about how you even begin to address the violence, the crime that comes with it. What does this whole story, this deep dive into the Almighty Saints, tell us about, I guess, the nature of street gangs and why they persist in our cities?
That's the question to really chew on, isn't it? It pushes you past easy answers and forces you to look at the deeper, tangled roots of it all. Definitely something for you, the listener, to think about.